300 years ago, the Galactic Council received humanity's final transmission. It was brief, desperate, and filled with static that spoke of a dying species facing extinction on a poisoned world called Earth. The message was catalogued, filed away, and humanity was officially declared extinct by the Council's Bureau of Dead Civilizations. The galaxy moved on. Species rose and fell. Empires expanded and crumbled. Trade routes were established across star systems that had once been marked as human territory on ancient star charts. The very mention of humans became nothing more than a footnote in xenobiology textbooks, another failed species that couldn't adapt to the harsh realities of cosmic existence. But the galaxy was wrong. Dead species don't build fleets that appear from the void like vengeful ghosts. Dead species don't wage war with technology that makes the most advanced civilizations look primitive. And dead species certainly don't return with a fury that reshapes the very foundations of galactic power. Humanity didn't die, they evolved. They adapted. They became something the galaxy had never seen before and was utterly unprepared to face. Now, as alien fleets burn in the darkness of space and proud empires crumble before an enemy they thought was nothing but cosmic dust, one question echoes across every inhabited world: what happens when you underestimate a species that refuses to stay dead? Admiral Zexthera had seen many things in her 4 centuries of service to the Kalari Empire. She had witnessed the birth of stars, the collapse of entire civilizations, and the brutal efficiency of her own species' military machine as it carved through lesser races like a plasma blade through flesh. Her dark blue carapace bore the scars of 1,000 battles, and her forearms moved with the practiced precision of someone who had never known defeat. Today, however, something felt different as she stood on the command bridge of the dreadnought Cosmic Fury. The view screen showed the emptiness of deep space in the Outer Rim territories, where nothing interesting had happened for over 200 years. This was supposed to be a routine patrol, a boring assignment given to veteran officers who needed rest between real campaigns. Admiral called out her communications officer, a young Kalari whose shell still gleamed with the unmarked polish of inexperience. "We're receiving strange readings from the Terran exclusion zone." Zexthera's mandibles clicked in annoyance. The Terran exclusion zone was a dead system, officially marked as hazardous due to the toxic remnants of a failed species called humans. Ancient records spoke of a world so polluted that nothing could survive there, and a people so backward they had destroyed themselves with their own primitive technology. "Define strange," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of centuries. The young officer's claws clicked nervously against his control panel. "Energy signatures, ma'am. Massive ones. They don't match any known technology in our databases." "Impossible. That system is dead. Run a full diagnostic on your equipment." "Already done, Admiral. 3 times. The readings are consistent." Zexthera felt a chill run through her exoskeleton, though she couldn't explain why. She had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming at her that something was terribly wrong. "Set course for the edge of the exclusion zone," she ordered. "Maximum safe distance. I want to see what's causing these readings." The massive dreadnought turned slowly, its engines humming with barely contained power. Around them, the rest of the patrol fleet followed suit: 12 heavy cruisers and twice as many destroyers, enough firepower to level a small planet. It should have been more than sufficient for anything they might encounter in this forgotten corner of space. As they approached the boundary of the Terran system, the readings became stronger. Zexthera found herself leaning forward in her command throne, her primary arms gripping the armrests while her secondary arms worked the control interfaces with growing urgency. "Admiral," the sensor officer called out, his voice tight with confusion. "I'm detecting multiple large masses moving through the system. They appear to be ships." "Ships?" Zexthera's mandibles clicked rapidly. "What classification? Which species?" There was a long pause as the officer worked frantically at his station. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Unknown design, Admiral. Unknown materials. Unknown energy signatures. They're unlike anything in our databases." Zexthera stood from her throne, her full height imposing even by Kalari standards. "How many?" I can't get an accurate count, ma'am." They're emerging from behind the planets, from asteroid fields, from areas where our sensors show empty space. It's as if they were hiding throughout the entire system. The main viewscreen shifted to long-range sensors, and what Zexthera saw made her blood run cold. Dozens of shapes were moving through the Terran system, then hundreds, then thousands. They moved with a coordination that spoke of advanced tactical thinking, yet their design was unlike anything she had ever seen. Where Kalari ships were built for intimidation, angular, aggressive, bristling with visible weapons, these vessels seemed almost organic in their smooth curves and flowing lines. "Open a channel," she ordered. "All frequencies. Let's see who's playing games in dead space." The communications officer worked for several minutes before shaking his head. "No response, Admiral. But I am detecting something else. They're scanning us." "Scanning us? With what?" "I don't know. It's not any kind of sensor array I recognize. The energy patterns are completely foreign." Zexthera felt her warrior's instincts taking over. Unknown ships in a dead system, using unknown technology, ignoring communication attempts, this had all the hallmarks of a trap. But, a trap set by whom? No species in the galaxy had technology this advanced, and certainly none that could hide an entire fleet in a system that had been regularly monitored for centuries. "Tactical assessment," she called to her weapons officer. The bulky Kalari at the tactical station was one of her most experienced officers, a veteran of the Andorian campaign who had never met a problem that couldn't be solved with superior firepower. His report was crisp and professional. "Unknown vessels appear to be armed, though I cannot identify specific weapon systems. Their formations suggest military training. Energy output from their drives indicates significant size and mass. Estimate minimum of 3,000 vessels, possibly more. 3,000 ships." Zexthera's mind raced through tactical possibilities. Her patrol fleet was powerful, but not designed to face those kinds of numbers. More concerning was the fact that she had no idea what she was facing or what their capabilities might be. "Send an emergency transmission to command," she ordered. "Full tactical alert. Unknown fleet of significant size detected in Terran exclusion zone. Request immediate reinforcement." As the communications officer worked to send the message, the sensor operator suddenly straightened in his chair. "Admiral! They're moving. The entire fleet is changing course." Zexthera looked at the tactical display and felt her heart skip a beat. The massive unknown fleet was turning toward them with a precision that spoke of unified command. Thousands of ships moving as one, accelerating toward her position with a purposefulness that left no doubt about their intentions. "Time to intercept," she asked, surprised by how steady her voice remained. "At current speed, 18 minutes, Admiral." 18 minutes to decide whether to stand and fight against impossible odds, or retreat and leave a potential threat behind. Zexthera had built her reputation on never backing down from a fight, but this was different. This was facing the unknown with incomplete information and, potentially, the survival of her entire fleet at stake. All ships, combat formations. Charge weapons and raise shields. Prepare for possible hostile contact. The bridge erupted in controlled activity as her crew prepared for battle. Warning lights bathed everything in a red glow, and the familiar hum of charging weapon systems filled the air. Around them, the other ships in the patrol fleet moved into defensive positions, their own weapons coming online. "Admiral," the communications officer called out urgently. "I'm receiving the response to our emergency transmission. Put it through." The voice of Fleet Commander Morak filled the bridge, his tone carrying the arrogance typical of high command. "Admiral Zexthera, your report of unknown ships in the Terran exclusion zone has been reviewed. The system has been dead for 3 centuries. You are likely experiencing equipment malfunction or misidentifying space debris. Conduct thorough diagnostics and resume patrol." Zexthera stared at the transmission indicator in disbelief. Command thought she was seeing space debris? She keyed her response with barely controlled fury. "Command, this is Admiral Zexthera. Confirm visual on 3,000 plus unknown vessels approaching our position. This is not debris. This is not malfunction. Request immediate heavy reinforcement." The response came back almost immediately, and the dismissive tone made her want to tear something apart with her claws. Admiral, the Terran system contains no life and no technology. Whatever you think you're seeing, it's not what you think it is. Resume Standard Patrol. Before she could respond, her sensor officer's voice cut through her anger like a plasma blast. Admiral. Energy spike across the unknown fleet. Something's happening. Zextera spun toward the main viewscreen just in time to see the impossible. Across the approaching fleet, lights were coming online. Not the harsh, angular illumination of military vessels, but something softer, more organic. The ships themselves seemed to be awakening, like sleeping giants opening their eyes. And then, cutting through all communication frequencies, came a sound that would haunt her for the rest of her life. It started as a low hum, barely at the edge of hearing, then rose to become something that seemed to resonate in her very bones. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't natural. It was something else entirely. "What is that?" she demanded. Her communications officer was frantically working at his station, his claws clicking against the controls with increasing desperation. "I don't know, Admiral. It's coming from all of them simultaneously. It's not on any standard frequency." The sound continued to rise, and, with it came something else, a feeling of presence, of intelligence vast and alien pressing against the edges of her consciousness. This wasn't just a fleet of unknown ships. This was something alive, something aware, something that had been watching and waiting. "Distance to intercept," she called out. 12 minutes. Zextera made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She turned to her weapons officer and gave the order that would start the first war the galaxy had seen in 2 centuries. "All ships, target lead elements of the unknown fleet. Prepare to fire on my command." As her fleet prepared to engage an enemy they didn't understand with weapons that might prove utterly inadequate, Zextera found herself thinking about ancient legends her people told their young. Stories of monsters that lurked in the dark between stars, waiting for the right moment to emerge and devour civilizations whole. She had always thought they were just stories. The sound from the approaching fleet reached a crescendo that seemed to shake reality itself, and then, suddenly, it stopped. In the silence that followed, a new voice filled the communication channels. It spoke in perfect Kalari, with an accent that belonged to no known world. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Reclamation Fleet. You have entered human space. You have 30 seconds to withdraw before we consider you hostile." Zextera's blood turned to ice. Humans. The dead species. The extinct race that had supposedly poisoned their own world and died centuries ago. And they were giving her an ultimatum. She keyed her response with shaking claws. "This is Admiral Zextera of the Kalari Empire. Humans are extinct. Identify yourselves." The response came back immediately, and the cold certainty in the human voice sent chills through her entire body. "Reports of our death were greatly exaggerated." 20 seconds. Around her, her officers looked to her for orders. The unknown fleet, the human fleet, continued its approach. 3,000 ships that shouldn't exist, crewed by people who should have been dust for 3 centuries, using technology that made her dreadnought look like a child's toy. "Admiral," her tactical officer called out desperately. "Orders?" Zextera looked at the approaching fleet and made the only choice her warrior's pride would allow. She had never retreated from a battle in 4 centuries of service, and she wouldn't start now, even facing an enemy that defied everything she thought she knew about the universe. "All ships," she commanded, her voice carrying across the fleet communication network. "Open fire." The space between the fleets lit up with the fury of modern warfare as plasma cannons, particle beams, and kinetic rounds streaked across the void. The first shots of a new war had been fired, and the galaxy would never be the same. What Admiral Zextera couldn't know, as she watched her weapons streak toward the human fleet, was that she was about to learn why humanity had been silent for 3 centuries. They hadn't been dying. They hadn't been hiding. They had been preparing. And now they were ready to take back what had once been theirs. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the Dreadnought Resurrection, watching the incoming fire from the alien fleet with the calm detachment of someone who had seen this scene played out in countless simulations. The bridge around her was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, a seamless blend of organic curves and crystalline technology that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Her crew moved with quiet efficiency, their enhanced nervous systems allowing them to process information and react at speeds that would have seemed impossible to their ancestors. 300 years of genetic optimization, cybernetic enhancement, and technological advancement had transformed humanity into something new, something the galaxy was utterly unprepared to face. Impact in 17 seconds, reported Lieutenant Kim Park from her position at the tactical station. Like Sarah, she bore the subtle signs of human evolution: slightly larger cranium, enhanced muscle density, and the telltale silver threading around her eyes that indicated full neural interface capability. Kalari Standard Plasma Configuration. Probability of shield penetration is 0.03%. Sarah nodded, her enhanced reflexes already calculating a dozen different response scenarios. The attacking fleet was using technology that had been cutting edge when humanity had supposedly died out. What they didn't know was that humans had been watching, learning, and adapting for 3 centuries. Every weapon system, every defensive measure, every tactical doctrine employed by the galactic powers had been studied, analyzed, and countered. "Let them fire first," she said calmly. "Full defensive posture. I want them to see exactly how ineffective their weapons are before we respond." The first wave of alien fire struck the human fleet like rain against a mountain. The advanced shielding systems that protected each human vessel were based on principles that wouldn't be discovered by galactic science for another 1,000 years. Energy that should have torn through metal and ceramic was absorbed, redirected, and dissipated harmlessly into space. On the viewscreen, Sarah could see the alien fleet's formation beginning to waver as their weapons proved completely ineffective. She had fought this battle in her mind countless times, had run the simulations until she could predict every possible outcome. The aliens were operating on the assumption that they faced an equal or inferior force. They had no concept of what 3 centuries of focused development could accomplish. "Incoming transmission from the alien fleet," Park reported. "They're demanding our immediate surrender." Sarah almost smiled. The arrogance was typical of what they had observed in galactic civilization. Thousands of years of technological stagnation had left the major powers convinced of their own superiority. They had grown comfortable with their position at the top of the galactic hierarchy, never imagining that a supposedly extinct species might have surpassed them entirely. "Open a channel," she commanded. The face that appeared on the main screen belonged to the alien admiral, a creature with 4 arms and a dark blue exoskeleton that spoke of a species evolved for warfare. Sarah had studied the Kalari extensively. They were proud, aggressive, and utterly convinced of their own racial superiority. They had spent the last 500 years conquering and subjugating lesser species, building an empire that stretched across dozens of star systems. Today, that empire would learn that there were things in the universe they couldn't conquer. "I am Admiral Zexthera of the Kalari Empire," the alien said, her translated voice carrying the harsh authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You will surrender immediately and submit to imperial authority. Your resistance is futile." Sarah studied the alien's face, noting the confusion and growing fear behind the aggressive posture. The admiral was clearly struggling to understand how her weapons had failed so completely. It was a look Sarah had seen before, in historical recordings of other species who had underestimated humanity's capacity for adaptation. "Admiral Zexthera," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a calm certainty that seemed to unnerve the alien. "I am Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Reclamation Fleet. You have attacked human vessels in human space. You now have 2 choices. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences of your aggression." The alien admiral's mandibles clicked in what Sarah recognized as a gesture of extreme agitation. "Humans are extinct. This system belongs to the Empire by right of salvage. Your records are incomplete," Sarah said simply. "We never died. We simply went quiet while we learned what we needed to learn. Now we're ready to reclaim what was always ours." On the tactical display, Sarah could see the alien fleet reorganizing for another attack. They were bringing their heavy weapons online, preparing to throw everything they had at the human fleet. It was exactly what she had expected. The Kalari were not a species that accepted defeat gracefully. Admiral, Park called out quietly, they're charging their main guns. Looks like they're preparing for a full assault. Sarah nodded. The time for talking was over. She had given them a chance to withdraw peacefully, but the aliens had made their choice. Now they would learn why humanity had spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment. All ships, she commanded, her voice carrying across the fleet communication network, implement Protocol 7. Full combat authorization. Show them what we've become. Across the human fleet, changes began to occur that would have seemed like magic to the watching aliens. Ships that had appeared merely advanced moments before revealed their true nature as their surfaces began to shift and change. Weapons systems emerged from what had seemed like smooth hull plating. Shield generators that had been hidden within the vessel's organic curves came online with power outputs that defied conventional physics. But the most significant change was in the ships themselves. As the alien fleet prepared to fire, the human vessels began to move with an agility and coordination that spoke of something far beyond traditional artificial intelligence. Each ship was not merely crude, it was alive, a fusion of organic and technological elements that had been growing and evolving for centuries. Second wave incoming, Park reported. They've increased power output by 300%. Sarah watched the tactical display with the detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly predictable experiment. The aliens were about to learn that the gap between their technology and humanity's was not merely one of degree, but of fundamental understanding of reality itself. The second alien barrage struck the human fleet with enough force to atomize a small moon. Advanced plasma weapons, particle beams, and kinetic projectiles that could punch through conventional armor like paper converged on the human ships in a display of firepower that represented the pinnacle of galactic military technology. And accomplished absolutely nothing. The human vessels absorbed the attack without even a fluctuation in their defensive screens. Where other ships would have been vaporized, the human fleet continued forward as if the most powerful weapons in galactic space were nothing more than a gentle breeze. Impossible, Admiral Zexthero's voice carried across the communication channel, the shock evident even through the universal translator. Nothing can withstand that kind of firepower. Sarah felt a moment of something that might have been pity. The alien admiral was facing the collapse of everything she thought she understood about warfare, about technology, about the basic laws of physics. It was the same reaction humanity had faced when they first encountered galactic civilization 3 centuries ago, the shock of learning that the universe was far larger and more complex than they had ever imagined. The difference was that humanity had adapted. Your weapons are impressive by galactic standards, Sarah said calmly. But you're fighting with principles and technologies that we mastered centuries ago. You've had thousands of years to advance, but you've grown complacent. We've had 300 years of focused development with a single goal in mind. What goal? The alien admiral asked, though Sarah suspected she already knew the answer. Survival. Evolution. And, eventually, reclamation of our rightful place in this galaxy. Sarah turned to her weapons officer, a young man whose neural enhancements allowed him to interface directly with the ship's targeting systems. Lieutenant Morrison, you may begin the demonstration. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations to come. The human fleet, moving with a coordination that seemed almost choreographed, unleashed weapons that operated on principles the aliens couldn't begin to understand. Energy beams that didn't just destroy matter but converted it directly into usable power. Projectiles that existed in a quantum state until the moment of impact, making them impossible to intercept or deflect. Defensive systems that didn't just stop incoming fire but absorbed it and redirected it back at its source. The result was not a battle, it was a demonstration of absolute technological superiority. Within minutes, half the alien fleet was gone. Not destroyed in the conventional sense, but simply ceased. Their matter and energy converted and absorbed by weapons that treated the fundamental forces of the universe as tools to be manipulated rather than obstacles to be overcome. Ceasefire, Admiral Zexthero's voice cracked across the communication channel. Ceasefire. We surrender. Sarah raised her hand, and the human fleet immediately stopped firing. The discipline required for such instant response to commands would have been impressive enough on its own, but what truly amazed the surviving aliens was the surgical precision with which the humans had operated. Every shot had been calculated to disable rather than destroy, to demonstrate power without unnecessary slaughter. Admiral Zexthera, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the now quiet space between the fleets. You and your surviving ships will withdraw from human space immediately. You will carry a message back to your empire and to the Galactic Council. What message? The alien admiral asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That humanity has returned. That we are no longer the primitive species you remember from your history books. And that any future incursion into human space will be met with consequences that make today's demonstration look like a gentle warning. On the viewscreen, Sarah could see the alien admiral struggling to process what had just happened. Her fleet had been effortlessly destroyed by weapons she couldn't understand, wielded by a species that was supposed to be extinct. The entire foundation of her understanding of the galaxy had just been shattered. But the records, Zexthera said weakly. The final transmission from Earth. Your world was dying. Your people were extinct. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Our world was dying. Our people were on the brink of extinction. But we didn't give up. We adapted. We learned. We became something new. And now we're ready to take our place in the galaxy again. She paused, looking at the damaged alien fleet. You have 1 hour to collect your surviving personnel and begin your withdrawal. Use that time wisely, Admiral. The message you carry back will determine whether the galaxy faces humanity as an ally or as a conqueror. As the communication channel closed, Sarah turned to her crew. Around her, the bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as they began the process of securing the area and preparing for the next phase of their operation. The demonstration was over, but the real work was just beginning. Set course for the inner system, she commanded. It's time to go home. The human fleet turned toward the heart of the Terran system, moving with the same fluid grace they had displayed throughout the encounter. Behind them, the surviving alien ships began the long process of retreat, carrying with them news that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Humanity was not extinct. They had not died quietly in the darkness of a poisoned world. They had evolved, adapted, and transformed themselves into something the galaxy had never seen before. And now they were coming home. The age of human dominance was about to begin. The Galactic Council chambers had seen many crises over the millennia. Wars between species, the rise and fall of empires, the discovery of new technologies that shifted the balance of power throughout known space. But nothing in the Council's long history had prepared them for the news that Admiral Zexthera brought back from the Terran exclusion zone. Council Speaker Vorthake, a massive crystalline being whose species had served as neutral mediators for over 2,000 years, stood at the center of the great amphitheater as representatives from dozens of species listened to the Admiral's report with growing disbelief. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a sphere 3 kilometers in diameter that floated in the void between stars, its transparent walls offering a stunning view of the cosmic dance beyond. Let me ensure I understand correctly, Vorthake said, his harmonic voice resonating through the chamber's translation matrix. You encountered a fleet of 3,000 vessels, crewed by humans, in a system that has been officially classified as dead for 3 centuries. Admiral Zexthera stood at the witness platform, her dark blue carapace still bearing the scorch marks from her retreat. Despite her wounds, she held herself with the rigid dignity expected of a Kalari officer, though those who knew her could see the shaken confidence behind her formal posture. That is correct, Council Speaker, she replied. The human fleet demonstrated technological capabilities that far exceed anything in our current understanding. Their weapons were unprecedented. A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. The Kalari Empire was one of the 3 major military powers in the galaxy. If their most experienced admiral was admitting technological inferiority, the implications were staggering. Ambassador Theklan of the Andorian Federation, a tall humanoid with silver skin and multifaceted eyes, raised his arm for recognition. Council Speaker, with respect to the Admiral's experience, is it not possible that she encountered some form of unknown phenomenon? Perhaps an automated defense system left behind by the extinct humans? Zexthera's mandibles clicked sharply, a sign of extreme agitation in her species. Ambassador Theklan, I spoke directly with their commander. A human female who identified herself as Sarah Chun of the Terran Reclamation Fleet. She was very much alive, very much intelligent, and very much in command of forces that could have eliminated my entire fleet in minutes. The chamber erupted in voices as representatives from dozens of species began talking at once. The implications of Zextharo's report were too vast to process easily. If humans still existed, if they had somehow survived their apparent extinction and developed advanced technology, everything about the current galactic order would need to be reconsidered. Vorthake's harmonic tones rose above the chaos, calling for order. Representatives, please. Admiral, you mentioned a message. Please share the exact wording with the Council. Zexthara straightened, her military training overriding her obvious discomfort. The human commander stated that any future incursion into human space would be met with consequences that would make their demonstration look like a gentle warning. She also indicated that humanity is ready to take their place in the galaxy again, either as allies or as conquerors. The silence that followed was deafening. For centuries, the major powers had carved up what had once been human space among themselves. Trade routes, mining operations, and military bases had been established throughout the Terran systems based on the assumption that humans were extinct and their territory was free for the taking. Ambassador Kretal of the Hegemony, a reptilian creature whose species controlled the largest commercial network in the galaxy, was the first to speak into the silence. Even if we accept this impossible report at face value, we're talking about a single fleet in a single system. Perhaps these survivors are the last remnant of their species, using advanced technology to bluff their way into negotiations. 3,000 ships is hardly a remnant, Zexthara replied coldly. And their technology wasn't a bluff. I watched weapons that could convert matter directly into energy. I saw defensive systems that made our most advanced armaments look like primitive projectiles. This wasn't smoke and mirrors, Ambassador. This was a demonstration of absolute technological superiority. Representative Yelandra of the Ethereal Collective, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, pulsed with colors that indicated deep concern. If what the Admiral reports is accurate, we may be facing a paradigm shift that threatens the stability of our entire civilization. The humans were always known for their adaptability and technological innovation. 3 centuries of development, driven by survival necessity, could indeed produce the capabilities she describes. The chamber fell silent again as the representatives contemplated the implications. The Ethereal Collective were among the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, and if their representative was taking the threat seriously, others would have to as well. Council Speaker Vorthake's crystalline form pulsed with the deep blues and purples that indicated serious consideration. The question before us is not whether to believe Admiral Zexthara's report, but how to respond to it. If humans have indeed survived and evolved as she suggests, we must determine our approach carefully. Ambassador Mordun of the Compact Worlds, a heavy-set humanoid whose species controlled most of the galaxy's industrial capacity, leaned forward in his seat. With respect, Council Speaker, our approach should be obvious. We have thousands of ships throughout what was human space. We have established infrastructure, trade relationships, and territorial claims based on 3 centuries of precedent. We cannot simply abandon all of that because one species has managed to develop some advanced weapons. Advanced weapons? Zexthara's voice carried a note of incredulous anger. Ambassador, they disabled half my fleet without breaking formation. Their shields absorbed our most powerful weapons without even flickering. We're not talking about an incremental advancement in technology. We're talking about capabilities that redefine what's possible. The debate that followed would rage for hours, with representatives arguing from positions of fear, greed, pride, and genuine confusion. Some called for immediate military action to eliminate what they saw as a potential threat. Others advocated for diplomatic contact to establish communication and potentially beneficial relationships. Still others suggested a wait-and-see approach, hoping that the human presence would remain limited to their original systems. What none of them understood was that while they debated, humanity was already moving. Deep in the Terran system, Commander Chen stood in the observation deck of the Resurrection, watching as massive construction ships worked to repair and expand the orbital infrastructure around Earth. The planet itself was a testament to human determination and ingenuity. What had once been a dying world choked with pollution had been transformed into something beautiful beyond description. Vast atmospheric processors worked to maintain the perfect balance of gases in the air. Orbital mirrors directed sunlight to optimize growing conditions across the planet's surface. The oceans, once acidic and lifeless, teemed with new forms of life that had been carefully designed to thrive in the restored ecosystem. But it was not the Earth of humanity's ancestors. This was something new, something better. A world rebuilt from the ground up using principles and technologies that the galaxy couldn't even comprehend. Commander, her tactical officer reported from behind her, were receiving updates from the scouting fleets. Sarah turned from the viewport, her enhanced senses automatically processing multiple data streams simultaneously. Report. Fleet 7 has reached the former mining colonies in the Kepler system. The hegemony operations there have been discontinued. Sarah nodded. The scouting fleets had been dispatched immediately after the encounter with the Kalari Patrol. Their mission was simple: reclaim human space and eliminate any unauthorized presence they found. The galaxy had spent 3 centuries treating former human territory as their own. It was time to correct that misunderstanding. Resistance? Minimal. Most of the facilities were automated. The few organic personnel were given the same choice we offered the Kalari Admiral: withdraw or face the consequences. And their choice? They withdrew. Sarah smiled slightly. Word was already spreading through the galaxy about the encounter with Admiral Zexthera. Smart commanders were choosing discretion over valor when faced with human ships. It would make the reclamation process much more efficient. Fleet status report? All primary fleets are operational and moving to their assigned sectors. Construction Fleet Alpha is 72 hours from completing the new shipyards in the Sol system. Production Fleet Beta has begun resource extraction operations in the asteroid fields. The first wave of new vessels should be ready within the week. Sarah nodded, satisfied with the progress. The plan they had developed over the past century was proceeding exactly as projected. The galaxy had grown complacent during humanity's absence, allowing their military technology to stagnate while they focused on territorial expansion and resource exploitation. They had forgotten the most important lesson of interstellar warfare: that technological superiority could overcome any numerical advantage. Commander, her communications officer called from the bridge, incoming transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting a formal diplomatic meeting. Are they? Sarah's expression didn't change, but those who knew her could detect the slight note of amusement in her voice. What are the terms they're proposing? Neutral location. Limited escorts for each side. Full diplomatic immunity for all participants. Sarah considered this for a moment. The council was clearly trying to assess the situation and determine their options. They would want to know humanity's intentions, their capabilities, and their willingness to negotiate. It was exactly the opportunity she had been waiting for. Accept the meeting, she said finally. But we set the location. They can come to us. Commander? Tell them we'll meet at Earth. Full diplomatic protocol. And suggest they bring their best xenobiologists and technological advisors. They're going to want to document what they see. As her communications officer worked to send the response, Sarah returned her attention to the view outside. Construction ships continued their work, building the infrastructure that would support humanity's return to galactic prominence. In the distance, she could see the first of the new generation of human warships taking shape in the orbital shipyards, vessels that would make even the Resurrection seem primitive by comparison. The galaxy had forgotten about humanity, had written them off as a failed species that couldn't adapt to the harsh realities of cosmic existence. They had carved up human space, exploited human resources, and built their empires on the assumption that humans were gone forever. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. The meeting with the Galactic Council would be humanity's formal reintroduction to galactic society. It would be their chance to establish the new rules, to define the new order, and to demonstrate exactly what 3 centuries of focused evolution could accomplish. Sarah smiled as she watched another construction ship begin work on what would become the largest space station ever built. The galaxy was about to discover that reports of humanity's death had been greatly exaggerated. And they were about to learn what happened when you underestimated a species that refused to die. The delegation from the Galactic Council arrived at the edge of the Sol system 3 weeks after Admiral Zexthara's encounter, and what they found defied every assumption they had made about humanity's current state. Council Speaker Vorthake stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Harmony, his crystalline form reflecting the light from dozens of massive construction projects that filled the space around Earth's star. Where once there had been empty void marked only by the orbital paths of dead worlds, there was now a thriving stellar civilization that dwarfed anything in the known galaxy. Massive space habitats rotated slowly in perfect synchronization, their surfaces gleaming with the soft bioluminescence that seemed to characterize human technology. Shipping lanes filled with vessels of impossible design carried resources and personnel between construction sites that stretched from the inner planets to the asteroid belt and beyond. "This is impossible," muttered Ambassador Theklan, his multifaceted eyes struggling to process the sheer scale of what they were seeing. "Our records show this system was dead just weeks ago. No species in the galaxy could construct this much infrastructure in such a short time." Representative Yilandra pulsed with colors that indicated profound shock and growing fear. "Unless they didn't construct it recently. What if this has been here all along, hidden from our sensors?" The implications of that suggestion sent a chill through the assembled delegates. If humans had been capable of hiding an entire stellar civilization for 3 centuries, what did that say about their technological capabilities? What did it say about how much the galaxy really knew about the species they thought they had catalogued and understood? "Incoming transmission," reported the ship's communications officer. "The humans are providing us with approach vectors and escort assignments." Vorthake straightened, his crystalline structure shifting to the formal patterns appropriate for diplomatic contact. "Put it through." The figure that appeared on the main screen was unmistakably human, but, like Admiral Zexthara had reported, there was something different about her. Commander Saracen stood in what appeared to be a command center that seemed to grow from the walls around her rather than being constructed in the traditional sense. Her enhanced features were subtle but noticeable to trained observers: the slightly larger cranium, the silver threading around her eyes, the way she moved with a fluidity that suggested enhanced reflexes and coordination. "Council Speaker Vorthake," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that somehow made the formal diplomatic greeting feel genuine. "Welcome to the Sol system. I am Commander Saracen, and I'll be your primary point of contact during these negotiations." "Commander Chen," Vorthake replied, his harmonic tones carrying the measured cadence of formal diplomacy. "The Council appreciates your willingness to meet with us. We have many questions about recent developments in this system." Sarah's slight smile suggested she was well aware of the shock her guests were experiencing. "I imagine you do. We've prepared a comprehensive briefing for your delegation, but perhaps it would be more effective to show you directly. We've arranged accommodations for you on Terra Station, our primary diplomatic facility. I think you'll find the tour enlightening." The escort that guided them toward Earth was unlike anything the Council delegation had ever seen. The ships moved with an organic grace that suggested they were as much grown as built, their surfaces rippling with patterns of light that seemed to respond to some internal rhythm. More disturbing was the way they moved in perfect coordination without any detectable communication between them, as if they were controlled by a single consciousness. Terra Station hung in orbit around Earth like a jewel suspended in the void, its spiraling towers and flowing architecture creating a structure that was clearly artificial yet seemed to follow organic design principles. As their shuttle approached the docking bay, the delegates got their first close look at the planet that had supposedly been dying 3 centuries ago. Earth was beautiful beyond description. The atmospheric storms that had once choked the skies had been replaced by perfect weather patterns that seemed to dance across the planet's surface in deliberate, artistic configurations. The continents glowed with the soft light of cities that appeared to be integrated seamlessly with the natural landscape rather than imposed upon it. Most striking were the orbital installations that surrounded the planet, massive structures that seemed to be part space station, part ecosystem, part work of art. "My God," whispered Ambassador Cretel. "What did they do to their world?" The human who met them at the docking bay was introduced as Dr. Elena Vasquez, Chief Science Officer for Terra Station. Like Saracen, she bore the subtle signs of human enhancement, but her appearance was somehow reassuring rather than intimidating. She moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable with her environment and her capabilities. "Welcome to Terra Station," she said, gesturing for them to follow her into the station proper. "I understand this is your first visit to human space in several centuries. I'm sure you have questions about what you're seeing." As they walked through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, the delegates found themselves in an environment that challenged every assumption they had about space-based construction. The walls were clearly artificial, yet they seemed to breathe. The lighting was perfectly distributed without any visible sources. The air carried scents that reminded each delegate of their own homeworlds, as if the station was somehow adapting its environment to their individual needs. Dr. Vasquez, Vorthake said finally, "Our records indicate that Earth was facing ecological collapse when humanity went silent. How did you achieve this level of restoration?" Elena paused at a large viewport that offered a stunning view of Earth's surface. "We learned to work with natural systems rather than against them. It took us nearly 2 centuries to develop the biotechnology necessary to heal our world, but the result speaks for itself." "Biotechnology?" Representative Yolandra's energy matrix flickered with curiosity. "Are you saying this construction is biological in nature?" "In part," Elena replied. "We've learned to blur the lines between organic and artificial systems. Our ships, our stations, our infrastructure, they're hybrids that combine the best aspects of both approaches. They can grow, adapt, and evolve in response to changing conditions." The tour that followed was a masterclass in advanced civilization that left the council delegates struggling to process what they were seeing. Vast hydroponic gardens that seemed to exist in perfect ecological balance without any visible maintenance systems. Manufacturing facilities where complex technologies assembled themselves through processes that resembled biological growth more than traditional construction. Most impressive were the human inhabitants themselves, people who moved and interacted with their environment in ways that suggested complete harmony between organic and artificial systems. The population centers, Ambassador Mordaunt observed as they passed through what appeared to be a residential district. "Where are they? We've seen perhaps a few hundred humans during this entire tour." Elena smiled. "You've seen several thousand, actually. Many of our people spend significant portions of their time in virtual environments that are indistinguishable from reality. Others work directly through cybernetic interfaces that allow them to control multiple systems simultaneously. The traditional distinction between individual consciousness and technological systems has become somewhat fluid." The implications of that statement hung in the air like a challenge. If humans had transcended the traditional limitations of individual consciousness, what did that mean for their decision-making processes? How did you negotiate with a species that might function as a collective intelligence when necessary? The formal negotiations began in a conference chamber that seemed to have been designed specifically to accommodate the diverse physiological needs of the council delegation. Each representative found their seating area perfectly configured for their species' requirements, with environmental controls that maintained optimal conditions for their comfort and health. Sarah-chan entered the chamber accompanied by a small team of advisors, each of whom radiated the same enhanced competence that characterized all the humans they had encountered. She took her place at the head of the conference table and looked directly at each delegate in turn, her enhanced senses clearly processing far more information than a baseline human would have been capable of managing. "Representatives of the Galactic Council," she began, "we appreciate your willingness to travel here for these discussions. Before we begin, I want to address what I'm sure is your primary concern. Yes, humanity survived the ecological crisis that nearly destroyed our world. Yes, we have spent the past 3 centuries developing technologies and capabilities that exceed current galactic standards. And, yes, we are now ready to reclaim our place as a galactic civilization." Vorthake's crystalline structure shifted to formal negotiation patterns. "Commander, the Council acknowledges humanity's survival and technological advancement. However, the territorial claims you appear to be making present significant challenges. The systems you call human space have been legally claimed and developed by other species for centuries." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her posture suggested that this was exactly the response she had expected. "Council Speaker, I think there may be some confusion about the legal framework we're operating under. The Galactic Council declared humanity extinct without making any effort to verify that declaration. Our territorial claims were abandoned not by us, but by a galactic community that assumed we no longer existed. But, the resources invested, Ambassador Mordun interjected. The infrastructure, the established trade relationships, the civilian populations that have built their lives in those systems will be compensated fairly, Sarah said calmly. We're not interested in causing unnecessary hardship to innocent civilians. We're prepared to offer relocation assistance, technology transfers, and preferred trading partner status to any species willing to work with us constructively. And if we choose not to work with you? Ambassador Theclon asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Sarah's slight smile was answer enough, but she provided clarification anyway. Then, you'll find yourselves competing with a species that has spent 3 centuries preparing for exactly this moment. We've studied your technologies, your tactics, your political structures, and your economic systems. We know exactly how to counter every advantage you currently possess. The silence that followed was profound. The delegates were finally beginning to understand the true scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just a technologically advanced species returning to claim their territory. This was a civilization that had used their presumed extinction as cover for centuries of focused preparation for exactly this moment. What do you want? Vorthe K asked finally. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her enhanced features making her expression impossible to read with normal diplomatic training. We want recognition of humanity's rightful place as a major galactic power. We want our territorial claims acknowledged and respected. We want to be included in council decisions that affect galactic policy. And we want to establish trade and technological exchange relationships with species that are willing to treat us as equals. And if the council agrees to these terms? Then, humanity will be a productive and beneficial member of the galactic community. Our technological capabilities could solve problems that have plagued galactic civilization for millennia. Our resources and expertise could benefit everyone. And if we don't agree? Sarah's smile became genuinely warm, which somehow made her next words even more chilling. Then, you'll discover what happens when you try to stand against a species that has spent 300 years learning how to win wars before they start. The negotiations continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The council delegation had come expecting to deal with a resurged human civilization that might pose a minor threat to established galactic order. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that had evolved beyond their understanding and was dictating terms from a position of absolute strength. As the formal sessions concluded and the delegates prepared to return to their ships, each carried with them the knowledge that the galaxy was about to change in ways that no one had anticipated. Humanity was not just returning to galactic civilization, they were preparing to reshape it entirely. The age of human dominance had begun, and there was nothing the galaxy could do to stop it. 2 years after the first contact at the Sol system, the galaxy had transformed in ways that would have been unimaginable to the species that had ruled it for millennia. The great powers that had once divided known space among themselves now found themselves adapting to a new reality where humanity had become the dominant force in galactic civilization. Admiral Sarah Chen, now holding the title of Fleet Admiral and serving as humanity's primary representative to the reformed Galactic Council, stood in the observation deck of the massive space station New Geneva, watching the latest arrivals to the diplomatic summit that would formally establish the new galactic order. The station itself was a marvel that dwarfed the original council chambers, a structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its organic architecture flowing between states of matter in ways that still challenged the understanding of even the most advanced alien species. Through the massive viewports, she could see the assembled fleets of dozens of civilizations, each representing a different response to humanity's return. Some had embraced the new reality and formed beneficial partnerships with human technology and expertise. Others had attempted resistance and learned too late that 3 centuries of human evolution had made such resistance pointless. A few had simply withdrawn from galactic affairs entirely, choosing isolation over adaptation. The Kalari delegation has arrived, reported Captain Kim Park, now serving as Chen's chief of staff. Her own enhancements had progressed significantly since the first encounter with Admiral Zexthera, and she moved with the fluid grace that characterized the latest generation of human evolution. Admiral Zexthera sends her personal regards and indicates she's looking forward to the technological exchange programs. Sarah nodded, pleased but not surprised. Of all the species that had initially resisted humanity's return, the Kalari had adapted most successfully. Their warrior culture had recognized strength when they saw it, and, once they understood that humanity offered partnership rather than subjugation, they had become valuable allies. Admiral Zexthera herself had become an advocate for human-Kalari cooperation, her own experiences serving as powerful testimony to the benefits of working with rather than against humanity's new capabilities. And the hegemony? Ambassador Kretel will be attending, though he's bringing a much smaller delegation than originally planned. Our trade agreements have been beneficial to their commercial interests. That was an understatement. Human technology had revolutionized galactic commerce in ways that made traditional economic models obsolete. Instantaneous communication across galactic distances, manufacturing processes that could create complex technologies from basic raw materials, transportation systems that made interstellar travel as simple as planetary surface transport, the commercial implications had been staggering. Species that had adapted quickly to work with human capabilities found themselves with unprecedented prosperity. Those that had resisted or attempted to maintain traditional economic models discovered that they simply couldn't compete in the new galactic marketplace. What's the status of the integration projects? Sarah asked, turning from the viewport to face the holographic displays that showed the current state of human operations throughout the galaxy. Ahead of schedule on all fronts, Park replied, her neural interface allowing her to access real-time data from hundreds of different projects simultaneously. The terraforming initiatives in the former contested zones are showing remarkable progress. The atmospheric processors are working faster than projected, and the ecological restoration systems are adapting to local conditions better than we hoped. Sarah smiled at that report. One of humanity's first major initiatives after establishing their new position in the galaxy had been to address some of the long-standing environmental problems that had plagued various species for generations. Worlds that had been strip-mined to the point of uninhabitability, ecosystems that had been destroyed by industrial pollution, entire star systems that had been rendered toxic by centuries of poor resource management. Humanity had offered to restore them using the same biotechnology that had saved Earth. The results had been spectacular. Worlds that had been written off as permanently damaged were now thriving ecosystems that supported populations larger than they had ever sustained before. Species that had been facing extinction due to environmental degradation found their homeworlds restored to conditions that exceeded their original beauty. The resistance movements? Park's expression darkened slightly. The supremacist coalition is still attempting to organize opposition to human expansion, but their support base continues to shrink. Most of their member species are discovering that the benefits of cooperation far outweigh whatever ideological concerns they might have about human dominance. The supremacist coalition had formed in response to humanity's rapid rise to galactic prominence, composed primarily of species that had held dominant positions in the old galactic order and were unwilling to accept their new status as secondary powers. Led by the Andromedans, a species that had considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic evolution, the coalition had attempted to organize military resistance to human expansion. Their efforts had been spectacularly unsuccessful. Human military technology had advanced far beyond what even the most optimistic projections had suggested was possible. Battles that the coalition expected to last months were over in hours. Fleets that had once been capable of conquering entire star systems found themselves outmatched by single human vessels. More importantly, humanity's approach to warfare had evolved beyond simple destruction. Human commanders seemed capable of achieving victory through means that left their enemies' infrastructure intact and their populations unharmed. It was a form of warfare that focused on disabling rather than destroying, on demonstrating superiority rather than imposing suffering. Any word from the Ethereal Collective? Representative Yelandra will be attending, and she's indicated that the collective is prepared to make some significant announcements during the summit. Sarah raised an eyebrow at that. The Ethereal Collective had been among the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy before humanity's return, and they had been studying human technology with intense interest. If they were preparing major announcements, it suggested that their research had yielded some interesting results. Preliminary reports suggest they've made breakthroughs in consciousness transfer technology based on human neural interface principles, Park continued. They may be ready to propose joint research initiatives that could benefit both species. The idea of combining human cybernetic enhancement capabilities with ethereal consciousness manipulation technology was intriguing. Humanity had achieved remarkable results in expanding the capabilities of individual consciousness through technological augmentation, but the ethereals had approaches to collective consciousness that complemented human techniques in fascinating ways. Schedule a private meeting with Yelandra before the formal sessions begin, Sarah decided. I want to understand exactly what they're proposing before it becomes part of the general discussion. As Park worked to arrange the meeting, Sarah returned her attention to the view outside the station. The assembled fleets represented the largest gathering of galactic civilization in recorded history, and the diversity of species, technologies, and cultural approaches was staggering. Yet for all their differences, they were all here for the same reason: to establish their place in the new order that humanity had created. The transformation hadn't been easy for many species. Civilizations that had spent millennia believing themselves to be at the pinnacle of technological and cultural development suddenly found themselves struggling to understand concepts that humans took for granted. Political structures that had been stable for generations were forced to adapt to new realities. Economic systems that had controlled galactic commerce for centuries became obsolete virtually overnight. But the results spoke for themselves. Diseases that had plagued various species for generations were being cured using human biotechnology. Planets that had been considered uninhabitable were being transformed into thriving worlds. Conflicts that had seemed irreconcilable were being resolved through human mediation techniques that achieved results none of the traditional diplomatic approaches had been able to accomplish. Admiral, Park said, drawing Sarah's attention back to immediate concerns, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Resurrection. Commander Torres reports that the deep space exploration fleets have encountered something unusual. Sarah felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Humanity's expanded capabilities had allowed them to explore regions of space that had been inaccessible to other galactic civilizations, and the discoveries they were making were reshaping understanding of the universe itself. Define unusual. Artificial structures in the galactic core region. Ancient, massive, and showing technological signatures that don't match any known civilization. Commander Torres believes we may have found evidence of a previous galactic civilization that predates all current species. The implications were staggering. If humanity had discovered evidence of an ancient galactic civilization, it would reshape everything they thought they knew about the history and development of known space. More importantly, if that civilization had possessed advanced technology, studying their remains could provide insights that would accelerate human development even further. Inform Commander Torres that I want a full report as soon as the summit concludes, Sarah said. And start assembling a research team. If we're looking at precursor technology, I want our best people analyzing it. As Park worked to send the necessary messages, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first encounter with Admiral Zexthera. Humanity had gone from a species presumed extinct to the dominant force in galactic civilization in less than 3 years. They had transformed not just their own capabilities, but the very nature of how galactic civilization functioned. The old order had been based on competition, territorial expansion, and the exploitation of weaker species by stronger ones. The new order that humanity was establishing emphasized cooperation, mutual benefit, and the elevation of all species through shared technological advancement. It wasn't utopian. There were still conflicts, still species that resisted change, still problems that required careful management. But, for the first time in galactic history, there was a sense that civilization as a whole was progressing rather than simply shifting power from one dominant group to another. The formal opening of the summit began with ceremonies that reflected the new multicultural nature of galactic civilization. Representatives from dozens of species participated in rituals that honored their diverse traditions while establishing the framework for unprecedented cooperation. Sarah watched from her position at the center of the proceedings, noting how naturally the various species interacted despite their fundamental differences. When it came time for her to address the assembly, Sarah stood and looked out at the gathered representatives of galactic civilization. These beings represented thousands of years of cultural development, millions of different approaches to the challenges of existence, and countless perspectives on what the future should hold. Representatives of the galaxy, she began, her voice carrying across the chamber through translation systems that converted her words into forms comprehensible to every species present. 2 years ago, humanity returned to galactic civilization after 3 centuries of apparent extinction. We could have approached that return as conquerors, using our technological advantages to impose our will on species that had forgotten we existed. She paused, letting the implications of that statement settle in the minds of her listeners. Every being in the chamber understood exactly how complete humanity's technological superiority had proven to be. Instead, we chose cooperation. We chose to share our capabilities rather than hoard them. We chose to lift up other species rather than dominate them. The results speak for themselves. Around the chamber, holographic displays showed the unprecedented prosperity and technological advancement that had swept through galactic civilization since humanity's return. Worlds restored, conflicts resolved, problems solved that had seemed intractable for generations. Today, we establish the formal framework for a new galactic order based on cooperation, mutual benefit, and shared advancement. Not because humanity demands it, but because all of us choose it. Together, we will explore the universe in ways that none of us could accomplish alone. Together, we will solve problems that have challenged civilization for millennia. Together, we will build a future that exceeds the dreams of any single species. The applause that followed was unanimous, a sound that represented not just approval but genuine enthusiasm for the future that humanity had made possible. As the formal proceedings continued, establishing trade agreements, research partnerships, and mutual defense pacts, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond mere achievement. Humanity had not just survived their near extinction. They had used that experience to become something greater than they had ever been before. And now they were sharing that transformation with the entire galaxy. The age of human dominance had begun, but it was proving to be an age of unprecedented prosperity and cooperation for all of galactic civilization. The species that had written humanity off as dead had discovered that they had underestimated not just human resilience, but human wisdom. The future belonged to all of them together, and it was going to be magnificent.